Christopher Lee. All right, welcome everyone. My name is Christopher Lee, and welcome to the third day of our Knowability event. It has been an excellent last 2 days, a lot of incredible information. So if you've had a chance or haven't had a chance to see it or participate, make sure that you check out the links that will be provided to see the other 2 events. Incredible speakers that we've had and great discussions, good questions. And we're really excited about today's program. And so get ready for a great hour and a half of some incredible information. Today is focused on unlocking the BCI and neurotech market for persons with disabilities. And it's sponsored by the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, the National Center for Adaptive Neurotechnology, as well as the IAAP, which is the International Association for Accessible Professionals, and of course, G3ICT, who is the lead for the Knowability Project, and that's the global initiative for inclusive information communication technology. So definitely welcome, and we'll move to the next slide.
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Malcolm Maestrel and I'm a Membership Services Coordinator with the IAAP. Thank you for joining us for today's session of the Knowabilities Virtual Symposium, Unlocking the BCI and Neurotech Market for Persons with Disabilities. Today's theme is neuroethics and disability rights. Before we begin, we have a few general housekeeping items to go over. Closed captioning is provided. To enable closed captioning, select the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The stream text link will be posted in the chat as well. ASL translation is also provided. Microphones are muted to prevent any background noise or disruptions. Please leave your questions in the Q&A. The chat will be monitored for general dialogue and technical issues. And now I'd like to turn today's program over to our over to our host conductor, Christopher Lee.
Thank you, Malcolm. I appreciate that. If you are going to be asking questions throughout, make sure that you say your name so the captionists will know who you are. My name again is Christopher Lee. I am the Managing Director of IAAP, as well as the VP and Chief Learning Officer for G3ICT. It is great to be here. I have been the facilitator for the last 2 days, and I've learned a lot from all the great speakers that we've had. Next slide. All right, so a little bit about Knowabilities. I've been around a couple of years now. Patrick J. McGovern Foundation funded the project at the start. Knowabilities explores the contribution of neurotechnology aided by AI, otherwise known as artificial intelligence, and other advancing technology with the goal of helping people with disabilities. So that's a little bit about the project. And now I would like to introduce Lydia Best, who's our rapporteur of today. Lydia is president of the European Foundation of Hard of Hearing People. And Lydia, is great to have you here today. We have an exciting day ahead of us. Tell us what you've thought the last 2 days have really popped up, bubbled up from the top, the bottom.
Thank you very much, Christopher. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you very much to my colleague, Teresa, for stepping in yesterday. So I have been given a difficult task of summarizing 2 past days. And it's quite difficult because there were so many different things to discuss and actually looked at. One of the things I found really catching my eyes is starting with the trends of technologies on the day first, and how the lines also between the medical model of disability and social model of disability plus rights model of disability kind of converging together, and there are no clear lines anymore. And another discussion was around ensuring that persons with disabilities are included in those discussions and conversations to ensure that they understand that. And but we all make sure that while we have advances in the technologies supporting our functions, at the same time, we do not stop making our society fully accessible, because that would be a backward step. And interestingly, innovations and innovators discussing the barriers they found to the upscaling of the innovations and how it could be improved. by looking at less red tape, let's say, with approvals. And also it's a viewpoint, of course, of a person with disabilities as well, where to make sure that the product, whatever is going to come out, is safe and it moves on with the technology as it progresses. And then yesterday we had the discussion on a near future landscape of implanted brain-computer interface devices. So, for example, cardiac pacemakers of tomorrow, in 10 to 15 years, will be much more available than it is now. And so that's a huge step forward. But also it's about the translation, about making sure that whatever devices are being brought into the market are safe. That's one of the most important discussion in general, but also they have to be accepted by the patients, person with disabilities. And so that was Florian who brought into the landscape. And then we had federal FDA bringing us a vision of what the regulatory landscape looks like to make sure it's responsive, but at the same time inclusive. And again, to make sure that devices are safe. And it brought us a very good understanding of what can be and what cannot be included in the regulation, or in general, it's not being included. And this shows actually that also understanding of how to market the devices and how to bring them out to the wider population. One of the things, of course, that are important is also the reimbursement area and financing of those devices to make sure that not only those who have deep pockets can actually access them. So that's part of the major discussions there. And then we had an interesting two polls, which caught my eye. One was on the first day, when the light was shed on the view of the audience, if the perceptions or understanding of disability is there. And actually, majority of the people did not think so. So there is a lot of work to do there. And then the second poll yesterday has shown quite a low awareness of regulations. And this is, for me, in both cases, so important that we have this kind of seminar like today and the webinar, because the whole symposium is about putting the right actors together and asking the right questions, as well as raising awareness. So I cannot wait for what we will hear today, because this session promised to be really interesting. Thank you so much. And I'll be back at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. We appreciate it. All right, so we're going to have our first panel that's up, and I want to introduce the moderator, which is Mohammed Ali Lafti. And Dr. Lafti is the G3ICT Director of Capacity Building and Advocacy. He was formerly the Executive Director of Disabled People International, DPI, and an international development professional specializing in inclusion of people with disabilities across a wide range of developing programs. His degree is in anthropology, which I did not know, Mohammed. That was first. That's interesting. And his dissertation was interesting too, the impact on persons with disabilities experiences with service providers and disability advocacy organizations in Lebanon. So Mohammed, welcome, my friend, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Good to have you all with us today. Welcome. So I would like to start this session by saying a few words based on what we heard in the last couple of days of this wonderful symposium. Neurotechnology research and development can be risky for participants. For example, invasive BCI and DBS are good examples. Costly for investments and not accessible and affordable for consumers. But such risks, costs, and expense are often justified by describing the future benefits for persons with disabilities if successful. How this research transfers over to safe, accessible, usable, and affordable products is often unclear. In addition, whether companies will even pursue investments into these products is oftentimes questionable. The decision to produce depends on market size and profitability, but both of which do not line up when talking about persons with disabilities who are disproportionately poor or under/unemployed. But even if companies decide to produce well-researched neurotechnology devices, they will be out of reach for many persons with disabilities, digitally inaccessible or functionally unusable outside of the lab setting. How can these issues be addressed in a more equitable and ethical way? Over the past 2 days, you may have participated in webinars that involved topics of neurotechnology usability examples by persons with disabilities, market data and market potentials, inclusive device design, digital device accessibility, government regulation for medical devices and other regulations for direct-to-consumer devices, just to name few. In the next 30 minutes, our distinguished panelists here at this session will try to answer the following questions that are sequential from the previous 2-day webinars. They will discuss issues of risk for research participation, safety and efficacy of neurotechnology devices, compliance with regulation and guidance regarding such devices, and the intersection among these issues. I would like to start by asking the first question to the 3 of our distinguished panelists. And I would like to ask them when they start to answer, if they briefly introduce themselves, like take 30 minutes to introduce themselves. We have Ian Burkhart, is the first panelist, then Stephen Tyler, and then Tom Brozard, who will be with us today. Welcome, the 3 of you, and I would like to start with you, Ian. How do you see the added value of neurotechnology in ensuring disability rights and inclusion?
Thank you, Mohammed, so much for having me speak today. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ian Burkhart. I'm the Vice President of the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium, where I work on our projects and really try to engage individuals with lived experience into research projects. As well, my background, I had a spinal cord injury 12 years ago and was enrolled in a clinical trial using a implanted brain computer interface. And I was the first person in the world to use that implanted computer brain interface to restore movement to my own limb with my right hand using muscle stimulation. But to answer your question about the added value that neurotechnology can bring, I really see it being a way to allow individuals with disabilities another tool to really help level the playing field in many aspects of life, whether that be social or vocational. I also think that with these tools, individuals with disabilities can better access a world that is not always created with them at the forefront of their mind, so that we don't have to rely on legislation and regulations to make the world a little bit more accessible for those individuals with disabilities.
Thank you, Ian. Excellent question. Steve, how do you see the added value of neurotechnology for ensuring disability inclusion? And if you can
thank you. I'm Steve Tyler. I'm Director of Assistive Technology and Transformation at Leonard Cheshire, which is an international organization, and it supports on a pan-disability spectrum people with disabilities of all kinds and quite often complex to live, learn and work in the manner we choose. That's our mantra. So you can imagine lots of partnership. And I'm lucky enough to lead on some of the transformational work that we're doing in technology generally. For me, the added value, we don't know. We don't know. This is an enormous area, and with enormous implications. So one thing we do know is we need to be involved in it, because we need to guide it. We need to ensure that we get what we need from it. We need to learn from previous mistakes and from previous engagement with technology. So today, we love our food being delivered. We love the fact that we can get on-demand video. We love the fact that we can be listening to a podcast about a book, and in my case, even if it's in Braille, I can read the book in Braille in an instant. I can download it, buy it, or borrow it, download it, and read it. 15, 20 years ago, this was a dream. This is madness, and there is no way this would be possible. Alongside these developments in technology, we will also, certainly in Europe, we're desperate to have our high streets back. We're desperate to be able to have a proper experience. We're bemused by the fact that shops are closing, that restaurants no longer open, or they're filled with delivery drivers picking up food. So what I'm saying is, we need to get ahead of the game in terms of what the technology can offer. The idea of controlling the environment around you, the idea of controlling limbs, of being able to transfer ideas, of being able to obtain information, and for that information to be utilized for you on your behalf, amazing. But what are the implications? And there are many, many of them. We need to engage.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. That's interesting. Indeed, there is a lot to learn, and the involvement of end users, particularly, something that's very important that we will come up to later in our discussion. Tom, how do you see the added value of neurotechnology?
Hi, my name is Tom Broussard. I'm the president of Stroke Educator. I'm also the founder and president of Aphasia Nation. I have done lots of things prior to my first stroke, but basically, this is what I now do, helping people with stroke and aphasia when you lose your language as a result. But thank you very much for being part of the panel. I really do appreciate it. When it comes to inclusion for people with disabilities, it really does take a village. It was mentioned several times over the last couple of days. On the shoulders of others with similar experiences, pioneers, stakeholders, and disability rights advocates. But it is more than the realization that there are other and different inclusion inflection points in business, governance, and science. For the wider public and public consciousness, another inflection point, or a cultural inflection point, is respecting the others, basically with people with disabilities. It is likely not an inflection point as much as shifting the cultural change over time, such that when cultural change does occur, and it takes a long, long time, it is not in response to a push, but a pull. The real inclusion can only mean a healthy respect for the others of all kinds that aren't the same as others. In the case of Aphasia Nation, one of our logos is Aphasia Nation goes beyond aphasia, because it really isn't just beyond one disability or another. It is beyond that, and coming to understand that the real reason for all of this is to build a collaborative community where we all can respect all the others, regardless of their skills or abilities.
Thank you, Tom. Excellent point about the connection of neurotechnology with the culture on disability and the role it plays in going beyond addressing certain issues or certain disabilities as such. I want to go back to you, Steve, and following up on your answer, I would like to know from your point of view, do you see nanotechnology as a replacement for promoting accessibility standards?
I mean, that's such an, it's a, it's a really interesting question. So we have, if I take a straightforward example for a moment, in the domain of web or apps or computer programs, you know, when we think about accessibility, what we're really saying is there is a domain. It is a preferential domain for obvious reasons, because most of us process vast amounts of vision. Something like 80 to 85% of our brain functioning is centered completely around vision. So not surprisingly, screens are it. So just focus on that for a second. We've had to invent a way of describing highly visual information to me, for example, who has a visual impairment. Or we've had to invent a way of people being able to manipulate a mouse or a pointing device, or using keyboards and alternative accessible communication devices to move around a screen. And that has required an agreement around standards. And in a way, there's a rough translation. I have to learn a great deal about the world of visual technology, or sorry, the way vision is presented. And we've invented almost like a set of verbiage that makes no sense to most normal people. So, you know, who knows what a combo box is, or a list item, or a radio button versus, you know, these are good descriptors, and they are very specific because they tell you how this thing behaves.
Mhm.
So if we move to the neurotechnology challenge, you know, it seems to me that we've got an issue around engaging in a whole new domain. My children, a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, used a brain controlled game about 4 weeks ago. This is a ball which you push by controlling currents of air from one end of a board to another, and you're in battle with each other. And it reads brainwave patterns and then calibrates how you're thinking about it. So then you can control the ball simply by thinking about where you want the ball to go. They really struggled to begin with. It was a very peculiar experience, and in fact, virtually unbelievable. But once they got the hang of it, it was simply an alternative way of beginning to think about, or beginning to control the environment. The other thing I'd say, so standards for me, we all share this stuff, but in a bigger way, I think for people with disabilities, and almost in a ridiculous way, those people that are likely to benefit the most from these technologies, I think our focus around standards, if we're going to focus around those at all, have to be around ethics and the moral challenges that it poses. The engagement with big data isn't truer than in this case, or the engagement with highly personalized information or profile-based information, and devices or systems making decisions on your behalf based on what it believes you've just asked it to do, or thought it to do, or whatever. And finally, very tight links in disciplines that normally don't really talk to each other in the depth that they need to have to. And often we talk about biomedical, biotechnologies. Well, these are enormously different domains. And then when you marry that up with policy, big data, big government, et cetera, and the regulatory environment, we have to reinvent the way we think about this stuff and talk about it. But much overused phrase, and I don't like it in many respects, co-production in the most genuine way possible, where we all together with scientists, medics, technologists, etc., are working to an agreed goal, objective, engagement processes.
Thank you, Steve. Excellent point. The complement, it's the complement between neurotechnology or technology and accessibility is so crucial. And I like how you also addressed how standards or dealing with standards is your ethical issue, and how we have to change the way how we think about standards in this manner. Thank you very much. Tom, neurotechnology is expensive for many people. And also this is another ethical issue. If we want to make sure that neurotechnology is accessible for everybody, we need to make sure that they are affordable. How do we do that? How do we make sure that neurotechnology will become affordable?
Always a good question, always a good answer, because it takes time. It really takes time. When you think about it, that so many tremendous technology achievements we have done over our world's life, our human life, has taken a lot of time, and there's been a lot of risks for sure. In modern times, there's a lot of risk with everything from rocket ships or going to the moon. And then, of course, what we're doing here with BCI. The interesting thing is that the safe, affordable, high maintenance, or doing the maintenance if it has to be high, all of those things will all cost their own amount of time and money to even get to that point. I liked what I heard the other day, one of the presentations about the overhyping, overblown, and sometimes misleading statements about various things we can do like tomorrow or next year. When it comes to stroke and aphasia and recovering one's language, it takes years. Although some people will say, oh, 3 months or 6 months and everything will be fine. It takes as long as it's going to take. And the way the brain works, in particularly, the brain is built with plasticity and improvement and become the second nature that it once had. It continues to take as much time as it will take. And it's very interesting the way the brain works in terms of BCI and other things, is that you learn by learning it. You learn by doing it. That's how the system works. That's how the brain works. So it is interesting if we say that things have to be affordable and cost what it costs, and do it immediately tomorrow. Others have said that all of those things will work over time, but one of the things is to realize that as the machines start working with the body also starts to adapt the brain and the machines, and starts to learn on its own as part of how the brain works. So using it helps you get better by using it. And that, I think, is one of the things that's necessary, is to really realize that over time, as much as the machines are being built and the safe and affordable component of that will come eventually, that will take its own time as the brain and the machines start to realize just how useful they are to each other as we go forward. So I do appreciate that self and affordable is definitely an issue, but it's going to take a long time. And hearing from the last couple of days, we're talking 10, 20, 30 years to reach these things, although reaching them sometimes, when they think about scaling, scaling has its own relative baseline. So we'll find out as day to day or year to year goes by when we readjust our baseline going forward. But I think it's still a tremendous realization how useful these machines are as we get better.
Thank you, Tom. Excellent idea. I agree with you. I mean, to make sure that one day neurotechnology will become affordable, it's very important to put it in use so we can prove to donors, investors, government or regulators that it's really helpful for end users to use this technology and it really works. So we can make sure that it will become more sponsored and find way to the market in a more affordable way. Ian, I want to turn to you. Tom brought up the point about using neurotechnology can be risky. So how do we convince people that neurotechnology is safe to use, safe to end users, and even to the surrounding society or surrounding community at large?
It's really interesting when you want to take a look at the safety aspects involved in neurotechnology. You know, I think a lot of people with disabilities will be less risk adverse if they can see the potential impact that this can have on their lives. I know for me, that was the case when I was approached about having neurosurgery that I didn't need. And, you know, all the risks that are associated with that, as well as, you know, my life as someone with a disability. I've already had multiple surgeries. So I needed to think about if that was something I wanted to undergo. It had unknown benefits to me and to science. And also, you know, I wasn't just having this surgery once to place the device, but at some point in the future, I would have had to have the surgery done again to have the device removed after the clinical trial was over, or whatever the ending factor may be. It was certainly something that you had to consider. Is it worth the risk? And for me, I ultimately determined that it was, because I knew the promise that the technology held. So I was very excited about that. But, you know, overall, neurotechnology is safe as long as appropriate safeguards and careful foresight have been taken. You know, I think yesterday we heard a lot about the FDA and how we're making sure that there are proper fail-safes designed for stability and longevity, and that, you know, the requisite research has been done in vivo and in pre-human research. But I think at the end of the day, we need to make sure that these devices are compatible with human life, so they're not bulky and cumbersome. You know, they can be used in any activity that we may want to partake in. So that means they need to be waterproof and rugged and be able to, you know, handle anything that life is going to throw at them, and also have a high level of integration into the environment, so that we're not worried about these types of devices adding to the social stigma of disability. But with that being said, you know, cutting edge technology will always be that. It's always going to be cutting edge. So there are inherent risks associated with neurotechnology and, you know, the latest and greatest. One thing that I think is very important to think about as we're talking about new devices that are going to be implanted into humans is potentially creating some sort of a escrow account to help support the future ongoing maintenance of devices as a safety net for the potential end users if the company or research organization happens to, you know, become obsolete or go out of business and lose funding. We don't want these, you know, hunks of metal still stuck in the human body without being able to be supported. And also, I mean, having something like that taken away from someone is, you know, essentially giving them another disability by, you know, rehashing that experience by removing their capabilities.
Thank you, Ian. I think here we have to address the issue of knowledge and how, as end users, need to know the impacts of neurotechnology on their lives on the long run, and the different stages of processing the usage of this technology. And here we go back to the point that Steve brought up at the beginning, that involvement is very important of end users in learning about neurotechnology and understand its role in their lives. And here I would like to start wrapping up by asking the last question to the three of you. And I would like to start with you, Tom. To what extent do you consider that launching a dialogue between scientists and engineers of neurotechnology on one hand and persons with disabilities and their representative organizations on the other hand is helpful, and how can we do it?
Always these good questions, because for me anyway, it just makes me laugh. The having scientists and engineers and people with disabilities, as well as the organizations that represent them, all have to talk. It is sort of part of the other, what I mentioned earlier, because part of the other means you have to actually learn how the other thinks about things, and not just want to adopt that and become the same kind of thinking, but you actually have to be able to see the other and see what they do and or don't do going forward. And it's an entirely new lexicon, actually. So I do like, there was another presentation a couple days ago about the metaphor of rivers meeting the sea. And I appreciated what he was talking about, the path that you go through in rivers to finally make their way out and finally get to market, I imagine is what they meant. That's a great metaphor, but one of the things that that he didn't talk about was the fact that these fish come from fresh water and they go into salt water. And that has their own kind of consideration for that metaphor in terms of the transition from the land to the sea, or otherwise from ideas into reality, through a very, very, very difficult path to fruition. So I think we need to continue to be part of the other and talk to the other all the time, repetitively, so we can better understand what it means for all of us. Because I know I ask lots and lots of questions. I'm usually quite ignorant about some of these things. And I just want them to keep telling me as I ask more and more and more going forward, as opposed to just talking about the lexicon of the one and the other one not really having any idea about how we should otherwise try to express it from our perspective.
Thank you, Tom. Indeed, engagement and staying in touch with different stakeholders is very important. And yeah, Ian, what do you think?
I'd certainly agree with Tom. I think engaging individuals with lived experience in the process from day one really allows for technologies that will have higher level adherence instead of a device that's going to, potentially, for lack of a better term, sit in the corner and collect dust. The work that I do at the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium is all about engaging individuals with lived experience with that whole mentality of, nothing for us without us. And I think that that's something that really needs to carry over into these technologies. For me, when I was involved in my clinical trial for the brain computer interface, I really saw it as I had a duty to give as much feedback as possible, because there were so few people that had the experience that I had had at that point. And being able to highlight that to make sure that the technology is going in the right direction is something that's very critical.
Great. Indeed, it's very important to make sure that we have our voices heard, share our feedback, complaints, and so on and so forth. This is very important to, bring the attention of scientists and engineers to what's happening and how we are experiencing things. Steve, what do you think?
I think, firstly, it highlights the importance of conversations like this, of groups like this, of G3ICT, and I sincerely mean that, because the challenge is big. It's big. And the reason I think it's big is because of various factors. I learned, I've been in this industry too long frankly. To verify this, I can tell, I mean, so 25 years ago, I met a guy called Jim Thatcher from IBM. Some of you might have heard of him. One of Jim's frustrations, he led a team of engineers, was, you guys, you know, drive me insane. The reason is you talk about accessibility. You've got lots of different requirements. You have different groupings of people with different disabilities with loads of conflicting messages, and we have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. So why don't you help me? Because from an engineering point of view, I need to know, how do I know whether I've built something that's accessible? What is a testable thing that I can carry out? So that's one example of exactly to the points just made earlier. There are people that live in a different world and they need translation, just as others on the other end of the spectrum need translation. What I mean by that is people with disabilities have an amazing ability to just make do, because that's what we do. We kind of just learn to engage with the world and do whatever, however weird it is, however, if it gets us through the day, or it serves a purpose, or a task can be accomplished, well, that's what we'll do. And under research circumstances, especially if you kind of ask questionnaires, etc., people will say, oh, yeah, I can do that, or I do very well. Under observation, what you see is normally it's appalling. The reporting is completely out of whack with the reality, i.e. people take longer, people, you know, find it more difficult than they will report. It's difficult too for people to imagine an alternative universe, which is what we're trying to get them to do. And so the majority of people live with the experiences they've got. And one way or another, we need to blend all of these discussions so that the Imagineers, the ideas guys, can say, with at least a sense of reality attached, these are possibilities. These are the kind of things. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine a world where, and begin to test out what it is, given the option, that people with disabilities would really want? I'll highlight just one very quick thing. We in a very obvious domain, you know, we worked globally, actually, UK, Europe, US, on digital TV. When we did the survey for people who were blind, partially sighted, and have other reading issues, 74% of them said, no, I don't need anything doing with accessibility. But partly that was because they had no idea of the concepts that they were going to have to engage with: electronic program guides, menu systems, you know, those combo boxes I mentioned earlier, all of those, which used to reside very safely away in the computing world. Now it's on your TV and set-top box. So one way or another, if you want to get with the program, you're going to have to engage with this stuff, because gone are the days when, you know, it would take a truck to deliver your Braille or large print TV listing. So we need engagement, we need proper dialogue and facilitation to enable these various different entities to engage with each other.
Thank you, Steve. Indeed, indeed, to bring together both ends of the bridge, or of the consumers and investors or industrialists, engineers, scientists, is very important. Very important to encourage also persons with disabilities and their organizations to get involved, to express themselves, to say what they have to say, because they are the ones who are using this technology and know how to make it better. And we promise at G3 ICT to make this happen. Thank you very much. It was an amazing panel. Thank you for all of your inputs. Thank you for your great responses. And I will turn to Chris. Do we have a few minutes for Q&A?
We have a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes for Q&A.
Yes.
So if anybody has any questions, please put them in the Q&A. It was an excellent panel, Mohammed, Steve, Ian, and Thomas. Excellent information.
If I may, while people are thinking, or not, depending, that general specification challenge too is a real one. You know, just very recently, we were specifying what we wanted to do was engage users who were going to be using systems in a new clinical records keeping system for Leonard Cheshire. So of course, you know, you engage with a focus group, you engage with people that, you know, they know what they want, hopefully. And of course, what they rehearse back, assuming they even can understand what the specification process really means to an IT guy, what they'll rehearse back is what they've seen before that seems to be good. So it's very difficult for people to imagine how different it could be because they're not armed, they don't have the tools to know. And so we found show and tell or Wizard of Oz type stuff is enormously important in this scenario where these things don't yet exist, or the world we're trying to create or the picture we're trying to paint isn't there yet. But let's imagine.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Indeed, we need to at least put this technology in use for people to know and to give them the chance to give feedback. Chris,
Great,
are
thank
there
you.
questions?
We actually have one that just popped in. What advice would you give to an organization trying to design opportunities for dialogue among scientists and members of the public, including those with disabilities? And we just have a minute or so to answer that.
Yeah, who would like to take that question?
I can speak to that.
Go ahead, Ian.
I think it's really amazing to make sure that we are giving a dialogue for scientists and members of the public to have discourse, but that needs to be done through the proper channels. So, you know, one of the projects that I work on a lot is forming consumer advisory boards and focus groups and things like that. So my biggest suggestion is to find advocacy organizations and groups that are already working in the space of those, you know, for the disabilities that you're trying to solve for, and reaching out to them and partnering with them on this type of work. So that way you can have this dialogue between the scientists who may not know the ins and outs of living with a disability. Like it was previously said before, a lot of individuals with disabilities just make do and get by because they don't have another choice. And, you know, highlighting that and showing some of the scientists and researchers and engineers and individuals that are creating the future of these types of devices will allow them to make better equipment for individuals with disabilities.
Great. Thank you, Ian. I think we came up to the end of our session. I would like again to thank you all. Unless there is any other or more questions to, but
yeah, I think we're good, Mohammed. Yeah, I think
we
we're
are
right
good.
on time. Nice
We're
job,
right
y'all.
on time. Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you
Thank
for
you
your
very much.
coming and participation.
Thank you.
Excellent answers, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, it is question time or poll time. And I'm gonna have Malcolm put up the poll, and we're gonna take just a minute or so to answer it. Malcolm?
Poll question for today states, should public funding of R&D in neurotech and BCI include criteria to ensure that research outcomes meet the needs of persons with disabilities, including their accessibility requirements? Choice 1 states yes, choice 2 states no, and choice 3 states I don't know.
Just give it a second here. This is Christopher. Still going, it's still going. Okay. Looks good, looks good. So overall, yes is at 79%. We've got no at 7% and I don't know at 14%. So the yes has it. So that's great. Thank you very much for that and participating in that. And we're going to move to our next panel now. Okay, I'm going to bring on Roger, Timothy, and Kara. And the moderator today is going to be Dr. Roger Smith, who is a professor in the Department of Occupational Science and Technology and director of the R2D2 Center, which is the Rehabilitation, Research, Design, and Disability Center at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Our panelists are Timothy Brown, who's currently an assistant professor of bioethics and humanities at the University of Washington School of Medicine. And then Kara Ramos is the vice president of neuroscience within the Society of the Dana Foundation. Dr. Ramos is a neuroscientist with extensive scientific management and communication expertise, and she oversees the foundation's strategy programs. Welcome, y'all. Looking forward to the panel. Roger, is all yours.
Great. Thank you, Christopher. I'm looking forward to this discussion. Hi, everyone. We have a great discussion planned. I'm going to say a little bit about me and suggest that the panelists, before they do their sort of initial discussion, that they may want to expound a little bit more on the background that they're bringing to the table. And I also want to just mention a little bit about where, therefore, I'm coming from. And then I want to provide an example that could be considered controversial to sort of get the discussion going. Like mentioned, I direct the R2D2 Center, the Rehabilitation, Research, Design, and Disability Center. It's an interdisciplinary center. My background is actually my PhD is in engineering, but I have a degree in health sciences and occupational therapy and a degree in the social sciences. So you can see how all of those kind of things come together in a lot of the discussions that I have. And something that we do in the R2D2 Center, I think, is really overlapping this discussion. We promote and measure accessibility of products and environments for people with disability, and that means all people with disability. And that reminds us that there are many types of disabilities, not one, but many. And in the R2D2 Center, typically we talk about 14 types of impairments and combinations and permutations, visible and hidden disabilities. And so when we talk about universal design, it's not one thing for one type of person with impairment. It's, obviously much broader than that. So here's my opportunity to stimulate a controversy. And I have an example to jumpstart us. And the example revolves around the criteria applied to NIH applications in scientific review. So what is fundable research? And in particular, what are inclusion and exclusion criteria that are used for robust scientific investigations? Well, a really good research study is going to be reductionistic, to look at a really specific question, to be able to come up with some really specific answers. So we know something works or something doesn't. And we're really uncovering and peeling the onion to come up with some specific discovery. To do this, we want to focus the research on a specific nuanced question and participant population. And in fact, I would say that a study section would not support the science of a study without significant types of people and groups excluded from the study. From a scientist perspective, it might be excluding the riffraff, the stuff that doesn't relate to their particular question. It might be non-English speakers. It might mean people with cognitive impairments or behavioral impairments, or a person with visual or hearing impairments or mobility impairments. And the roster goes on and on and on. In fact, you can look at almost any funded study or any application in NIH, and you are going to see extensive exclusions that, include people with disabilities. In fact, that's where it starts. Ironically, some of the most significant neuroscience discoveries has been widely informed by people with disabilities and by serendipitous discoveries, finding unplanned surprises that people with disabilities reveal. So to further highlight this irony, at NIH, the Centers for Scientific Review require that any application, any scientific team that is applying for funding to do a study supported by NIH must discuss whether excluding people with gender issues and why, and explain it. If they're excluding children and be able to explain it, or excluding minorities or being able to explain it. So who's missing at the table? Who in fact are not proliferating exclusion criteria, but no way do we ever have to defend that we're leaving people with disabilities out. And so two big issues. One, just equity and research participation, but also the loss of science and discovery when you don't have people with disabilities as a part of the research population. So anyway, that's just to sort of get us thinking. And I'm going to go ahead and kick this off and open it up to the panelists to comment and expand on this discussion.
Can you hear me? Okay,
I hear
great.
you.
I can.
Thank you, Roger, for getting us started. So I am so happy to be here. I definitely wanted to thank Teresa Vaughn for inviting me to be part of this discussion today, and thank Roger for moderating and Tim for joining me in this fireside chat. So I think the point that you're raising, Roger, is a really important one. We're going to come back to that, but I want to just back up a little bit and say a little bit about where I'm coming from. So I think there's no doubt that scientific discovery and technology development create new knowledge and can generate solutions to societal issues and improve quality of life for different people. I think neuroscience holds so much promise, and as a neuroscientist, I am still so excited about where the field is going. At the Dana Foundation, we're building programs to help ensure that neuroscience progresses in alignment with societal values and in support of human flourishing. And this idea of neuroscience for people is so important to me. Before I joined the foundation this year, I spent about 10 years at NIH doing what I would call neuroscience research administration. And much of that work was focused on something called the BRAIN Initiative, which is a flagship neuroscience effort at NIH that aims to essentially develop new tools and technologies to revolutionize our understanding of the human brain and our ability to intervene when people have brain-based diseases or disorders. So I'm going to put a link in the chat to the BRAIN Initiative if anybody wants to check it out. My primary role there was to build a neuroethics program. And for anyone who's not familiar with that term, neuroethics, I will define it as a derivative of bioethics that's focused on the ethical, legal, and societal implications of neuroscience research and the applications of that research. I think at the heart of it is the idea that responsible neuroscience research requires continual dialogue among the researchers, ethicists, public audiences, including people living with different brain-based conditions, disabilities, and people who might want to use the technologies that are under development. So this is certainly a theme that I heard in the previous panel. So when I was at the NIH doing that work, one of the first things that we did was to build a compass, I would say. And we wrote a set of guiding principles for the research that we were funding through the BRAIN Initiative. I'm going to put a link in the chat to that paper that describes those principles. So a lot of time and thought and stakeholder input went into developing this list of 8 principles. And I'm certainly not going to talk about them all. We don't have time. But what we wanted to do with this conversation was focus on the last principle on that list, which reads, behave justly and share the benefits of neuroscience research and resulting technologies. I think you can really summarize this as a principle of justice. And for anybody who's familiar with the Belmont Report, that is the 3rd principle of the Belmont Report. And the report is meant to provide ethical principles for all types of human subjects research. So some scholars have argued, and I would be inclined to agree with this perspective, that in the United States, the principle of justice is the least developed and attended to among these 3 ethical principles for research with humans. I think it is unjust when some people, some groups of people are categorically excluded from participating in biomedical research. And there's a long history of that with, for instance, pregnant women, and as Roger mentioned, people with disabilities. I think it's also unjust when the benefits of research are not accessible to all people. This was something I thought about a lot when I was at NIH, because that work is funded by taxpayer dollars. You know, we're all paying into the system, and so we should all be able to benefit from it. So I want to bring you in here, Tim, because I know you've thought about this so deeply, and I think it would be wonderful to hear your framing that has underrepresentation in research and the worry of exploitation as sort of two sides of the coin.
Absolutely. Before jumping into the conversation, I want to back up, as the two of you did, and talk a little bit about my positionality. So I am here in this Department of Bioethics and Humanities, but my claim to fame was and continues to be my participation in the University of Washington's Center for Neurotechnology. And this was a National Science Foundation funded center, engineering research center that worked on stroke rehabilitation technologies, spinal cord rehabilitation technologies. Their aim was to produce devices that engineer plasticity, so induce plasticity in regions of the brain for rehabilitative purposes. And so my work there under Doctors Sarah Goering and Aaron Klein of OHSU really focused on figuring out a way of doing ethics engagement at many different levels of this really interesting neurotechnology center. And as a result, I ended up as an embedded ethicist or a humanist in a laboratory focusing on the use of invasive neurostimulation for motor disorders like essential tremor, Parkinson's, and dystonia. And one of the things that I learned there was that there are so many resources that are going untapped, and that there are so many sites, nucleation points, if you will, for inclusion and exclusion, right? So Roger did an excellent job of walking us through a potential problem related to inclusion and exclusion criteria in studies themselves. But problems like those start upstream. And they start so far upstream that they really start in the conversations that we have about research before we write grants. And before we have even grant giving programs. So who do we give the money to, and who sets the criteria for that? Who evaluates the applications for those programs? And so are people with disabilities included in that process? Not as much as any of us would like, not even close. And so that process of exclusion, that pipeline of exclusion, goes throughout the brain sciences, throughout research and development, not just at these grant-giving organizations, but in the faculties at universities, in who's represented in neurotechnology companies or medical device companies. Who are the graduate students in the laboratories that are proposing projects. And so what we see are conversations about including people with disabilities, but they always stop at discussions about how we can bring people in to research studies. But even there, there's the possibility, as thank you so much, Kara, for mentioning this, for exploitation. Are people who people with disabilities compensated for their research? Are they given access to the technologies that they're asked to help develop? Does the research process open up opportunities to these groups of people? But then again, there's there's this rich field of possibility when it comes to thinking about who's represented, because as it was mentioned many times today, and definitely I'm sure many times in on days 1 and 2 of this great symposium, disability is not a homogeneous category. It's not a field of people who look like one thing or are one thing. There are many kinds of disabilities, like Roger mentioned, but there are also intersecting identities that have a huge impact on the lived experience of disability. What it's like to be a person of color with a disability is completely, or maybe not completely different, but substantially different than what it's like to be white with a disability. What it's like to have, to be part of a different gender category, to be fluid or queer, or have a different sexual orientation. These factors change what it is to move through the world with different forms of disability. And so what are we looking at when it comes to representation in neuroscience? We're looking at, deficiencies in how people are represented at different stages of R&D, in funding models, as researchers, as end users, as members of communities that get reached, that are reached out to participate in moderating how these technologies are deployed and the impact that they have. There are huge disparities in which people with disabilities are welcomed into any of this. Oftentimes, and I'm speaking from my own experiences, gathering the perspectives of people with disabilities, working on invasive or using invasive neurostimulators experimentally. A lot of the studies, at least here in Seattle, attract a certain kind of person with disabilities. People who have essential tremor and some injuries, different impairments that come together in such a way. But there are white men largely that have participated in my studies. I'm starting to see that change as we try to bring other groups of people into the research, into the qualitative research process. And this has been eye-opening for me because, Black perspectives on spinal cord injury and, neuroprosthetics, for example, are substantially different than white perspectives on those same issues. And so what it means to be inclusive, what it means to represent people with disabilities, it's an increasingly complex problem and a complex space with so much opportunity. And I've been going on long enough, but this is how I'm thinking of it.
Yeah, I think that's so much there that we could dig into, Tim. One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking is this really important point about the fact that each person has different facets of their identity, right? And I think the way that we do science now with people doesn't have a good way of capturing that and grappling with that. And as Roger was saying at the beginning, I think like by design, studies tend to be very reductionist because we want to simplify the variables to find true, causal links that are useful for us to make progress in our understanding of disease or whatever's being studied. And so I think there's this mindset that complexity is, counterproductive in designing good scientific studies, complexity of who you're studying, basically. But I'm hoping that as, technology continues to advance, that we will be better able to design studies that can really capture and grapple with the complexity of the different, facets of the identities of people in our studies and tease those things apart, whether that means leveraging advances in I mean, I think about like data science and some of the huge databases that are being constructed now to be able to try and get at those questions and look at the intersections of, you know, the different aspects of a person's identity, but also like where they live, what their so-called exposome is, you know, trying to crunch all of that together and see like, how do these things affect outcomes for people in different domains of health? So, you know, I'm just sort of thinking that I hope, like I said, that as science continues to advance, that complexity of research participants will be seen as a feature and not a bug, you know?
I completely agree. Yeah, I think complexity is definitely a feature, not a bug, because, you know, life with disability is a complicated life. As folks mentioned in the earlier panel, which I deeply appreciated hearing, living with disability is a process of making do, and I think that's an experience that a lot of other marginalized identity, people in other marginalized identities are also familiar with, right? So, you know, experiences of being Black or Hispanic or queer or any number of identities, moving through a medical system that is, you know, downright to the structure, to the roots of these systems, not meant for us, not meant for us in ways that make it difficult to get the kinds of care that we expect. And, you know, for, you know, people in the margins, and I count people with disabilities as among them, making do is often the best we can do. And so those stories of making do need to be captured. And sometimes I think that maybe quantitative metrics are not the best way of capturing those stories, but sometimes I think we haven't tried hard enough to, through newer methods like you mentioned, Kara, you know, big data scientific methods, and try to figure out ways of capturing or representing or presenting those narratives, of telling those stories, because that's all science is. Maybe I'm being too reductionistic, and maybe this is my philosophical training, my weird philosophical training, rearing its ugly head, but I think of science as storytelling, and I think a lot of data scientists think of it that way, right? Like, what are we doing when we make visualizations of data, but telling a story about a particular group of people or a particular phenomenon? And how can we use the data that we are collecting through larger studies to tell stories about people who have intersecting identities? And I think one way that we can do that is to foster or cultivate our sensitivity to those stories in the first place. And part of that means not thinking of you know, the different identities that we can have as completely and utterly distinct, right? I don't think of people with disabilities as others. I think of myself as one of them, right? Like, as someone who's had chronic depression for a long time, as someone who would be considered obese, as someone who's had, functional impairments my whole life, essentially. I don't consider myself completely and utterly distinct from the disability community, right? And I don't think of, you know, people positioned differently as, you know, an other, right? Like, we're all part of a similar set of people who come together to talk about issues that arise out of the technologies that we're trying to build. So instead of thinking of, you know, people with disabilities as like some group that we're trying to do studies on and just capture their experiences, we need to think of people with disabilities as lab mates, as
Mhm.
boardroom members, as community participants who, are a deep part of the research, as
Right.
coworkers at the
Mhm.
technology devices companies, right? Like,
Right.
there is no distinction. We're all part of the same groups.
Yeah, I think you're making a really important point, Tim, that there's the risk of othering,
Yes.
and we definitely don't want to go down that path. So I see that we're getting, oh yeah.
Yeah, this is Christopher. We're all getting some questions. You and
Yes.
I were in sync.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
so
Yeah.
do you want to, can you answer some
Sure.
of those questions? One of them is for Dr. Brown, and then one of them is more general.
Yeah, I think I was gonna suggest maybe, Tim, you could talk to the first one or speak to the first one, which is asking about methods that you've used to increase the diversity of people in research. Are there certain advocacy groups that you reach out to, or is it more of an on the ground effort going to community centers, churches, word of mouth, et cetera? I think this is a great question. How do you approach diversifying participation in BCI research, for instance? I mean, I think one thing I would say, maybe just from the perspective of a funder, and I'll give you a moment to gather your thoughts, Tim. When I was at the NIH, we would talk about this a lot. Like, some of those BCI studies are very labor and time intensive, and there's a lot of interesting questions around compensation for research participation. And I think that just attending to and being aware of the reality of different types of people that you might want in your study and what it would take for them to be able to participate is something that is important for funders to do. And this, I think, goes back to the point you were making, Tim, about how upstream decisions are really shaping the outcomes. I mean, that's something that I thought about so much when I was at NIH, because I think all the people who are involved in doing science, whether they're funders or scientists, are really in a position to absolutely shape the trajectory of that science. And I just always would hope that those individuals would realize like how much of an impact their day-to-day decisions can have on, the outcome of what they're doing. Whether it's asking these kinds of questions of like, is the design of our study even unintentionally excluding people that really should be at the table? So that general question of like, who's not included in the room or at the table, and how do we get those people, I think is something that everybody who's doing science can be asking themselves. So yeah, Tim, to go back to this very sort of specific example of that kind of a question, were there particular methods that you used to try to diversify who was participating in the research at the Center for Neurotechnology at the University of Washington?
So one thing that I've noticed in evaluating grants for the NIH is that there's often an excuse given for why we don't include people of different minority groups. So for example, I'm in Seattle, and Seattle is skewed white in demographics, and therefore we can't expect the number of people that we recruit to our study about brain-computer interfaces, or our ECOG study, people with epilepsy using stereo ECOG for evaluations if we're going to do studies on them. But it really is whoever walks in the door. So we really can't expect diversity in our sample. People use this excuse a lot, and people that I've seen more successful in diversifying their studies, they'll reach out to community organizations for recruitment. They'll reach out to other clinicians if it's a clinical study who serve minority populations. That's the kind of on the ground active recruitment that's necessary to overcome the barrier to diversifying a study. But I'm thinking more about methods of diversifying graduate students, faculty, people who evaluate grants, people who sit on research foundations or in administrative roles. And I think many of those are bog standard social model of disability issues, general accessibility issues. Laboratories don't think that they can have people with disabilities in them. So they say, well, you know, it'll be hard to accommodate them or something like that. Or, you know, faculty's biases might come out in a hiring process in an engineering department or a computer science department, or, and we all know about, you know, biases in surgery, in medicine in general. You know, people with disabilities are deeply excluded from those fields. So I think we should aim for saturation rather than just mere inclusion, right? We should be thinking about how we can target populations of people who are generally left in the margins, how to bring them closer to the center. And we should be doing that at all levels. And sometimes that takes an actual organization. We need an actual organization. Here at University of Washington, we have the Do It program. Do It stands for Disabilities, Opportunities, Internetworking, and Technology. This is an organization that brings students into laboratories. Like, they will literally bring a student into a laboratory who's got an impairment and make sure that the laboratory isn't worried about accessibility. In one case, I guess I would consider her a mentee. She had a visual impairment, and all that was necessary for our lab to accommodate her is to get her a big monitor. So they took the big monitor from one room to the next room, and she could use the big monitor. That was it. But there was a lot of trepidation about how we could accommodate. And having people with disabilities in the laboratory changes the culture, right? So I guess the general remark I would make is that we should think about methods that change the culture, change the way we think about inclusion, change the way we think about diversity, and bring more people into different parts of the research process. And that will mean, you know, institutional support.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you. We've come to the end of the time, and Roger, Kara, and Timothy, what a great way to end this 3 days. You know, to be able to, you've really given us a lot to think about, all of you, and I appreciate that. And your thoughts are well taken, and I think it deserves additional, obviously, discussion, a lot more discussion. So maybe we'll be circling back around and talking about the importance of including a diverse group when you're doing research and in anything, actually. So thank you very, very much, Roger, Kara, and Timothy. A lot to think about here, a lot to unpack, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome.
All right, everyone, we are close to the end, and we're going to bring back Lydia. And Lydia, there's a lot there today and over the last 2 days, now this third day. So I'm just going to have you come on and take it from here.
Oh, wow. I have to say my notebook is getting very thick now with all the notes. And to be honest, today has kind of blown me away. And a lot of discussions are very much close to what I do as well, and I'm getting involved in. And on top of that, there is a disclosure. I am one of the recipients of the neurotechnology, which is the cochlear implant. So listening to all the discussions has been really amazing for me. Some of the things I knew, some of the things I didn't. And now, so as I mentioned earlier on, we had the 2 days first. The day first was mostly trends of assistive technology, starting the discussion about especially some kind of pushback from the disability community, not fully convinced that neurotechnologies and new emerging technologies are actually for their benefit, or if it is actually to avoid increasing the accessible society, just getting us to adapt to the society, you know. So what kind of discussions? Then discussions as well around the innovations and how much innovators want to go forward. They want to get those devices out in the market, but there is a red tape. And then, of course, yesterday, a lot of things about discussions around red tape, but also the safety and making sure the devices are affordable and there are ethics around it. But today, the discussion, especially the first part where Thomas, Steve, and Ian discussed in depth the actual ethics, it's really important because that is exactly where the representation is, which came up later in the second part. There is a value, of course, to the neurotechnology, but even from my example, you know, in the community I am part of, people with cochlear implants, how do you decide and measure the value? It's really difficult. And it's true that sometimes it takes years before you actually can see the value. So for some people, they might be actually managing very well with a new technology such as cochlear implant or brain computer interface, and another person may not. And the medical profession themselves don't understand what are the differences. Probably one of those differences are around people with disabilities making do with the things that they have. The way people with disabilities adapt to their environment is amazing. And probably one of the missing things as well in the discussions when it came out to the second panel, which is around the making sure that the fundings and the actual calls for research do not deliberately exclude persons with disabilities. And one of the things which came from the discussions over the 3 days as well, and especially with the last panel just touched on, is it's kind of trying to get the message out there that the disability does not exist in silos. It's the cross-sectional. And unless we do that in this way, we are not going to get the right results, and we're not really studying or giving the stories in the right context. And of course, when we look at deliberate exclusion of some of the areas in the studies, but also how complex some of the studies are, is perhaps we need to translate the language as well to ensure that persons with disabilities and other minorities can fully participate. And one of the things as well discussed were, because the ethics panel was really amazing, was not just affordability of the technologies, but especially the safety. Safety to make sure, as Ian mentioned, that the person can have something what works with them over the years. Interesting point he has made is also about not taking away that technology from them. And I fully understand what he was talking about, because in some countries we see, especially with people who use cochlear implants, that once the technology doesn't work for whatever reasons, after all, it is a technology, sometimes the funding might not be available to allow this person to continue with using the technology, having the replacement, repairs, and so on. So the continuity, the ability to have that technology throughout the lifetime, when person needs it, is also very important. So I think I would like to just wrap up by saying all three different days of this symposium have touched on very important topics and brought together everyone to the table. Now we need to see this translating into practice and to see the benefits for everyone. I think I would like to commend everyone who was working on this symposium and all the speakers, because you have basically open the can of worms in some ways, but it needs to be open and we need to start talking about it. So thank you very much, everyone. And if I missed something or someone, it's not intentional. It's so much to take in. Thank you.
This is Christopher. Wonderful summary over the last 3 days. Excellent job. Thank you so much for your participation and your expertise. And we are at the very end of the 3 days. Survey. Please give us some feedback. The survey link is in the chat as well as on this slide. It will really help us formulate where we go now, what we do next with Knowabilities becoming regarding a webinar series. I just want to make sure you also stay connected to find out information about what we're doing. So we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube. So make sure that you link up with us. And I particularly want to echo what Lydia said. I want to thank the presenters, phenomenal presenters. All you participants were just excellent, great questions. I want to thank the partners that we have, the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, G3ICT, obviously, the National Center for Adaptive Neurotechnology, IAAP. I want to thank our accessibility team, Beth. Wonderful. Tammy, thank you so much. And Kelly, y'all have been amazing and kept us together. And it was really awesome. And again, I want to thank the G3ICT and IAAP team for all the work that they've done. Well, signing off. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day or evening, and hopefully we'll see you soon.